Good evening, everyone. We will start in a few minutes. Present guest to the stage, Mr. Neil MacGregor, Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, Director General of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangralaya, and Mr. Anjali Kumar Singh, Director General, Bihar Museum. Sir, if you could please join us on stage.
कर दिए।
I would like to request Anjali sir to welcome Neil and Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee with a bouquet, shawl, along with a small token of our Bihari folk art and craft tradition.
जाने का चाहिए मैडम का भी एक वहाँ से देखेंगे
Sir, before we begin, I wanted you to introduce our speaker and the session, and then we could all join.
Friends, we have Mr. Neil MacGregor and Dr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee with us. This is a very important day for Bihar Museum. Many of you will remember when we started our Bihar Museum Biennale, the inaugural address was done by Mr. Neil MacGregor. It could not happen physically, so it was done virtually. And today we have him physically among us. It's a great privilege. He has I'll give a little background. The topic I will not touch because he will be telling all about it. Neil MacGregor is an art historian, author and advisor to the Paul Getty Foundation in Los Angeles and to the Chhatrapati Shivaji Museum in Mumbai. MacGregor was a student of history of art at Courtauld Institute. He was editor of the Burlington magazine before becoming director of the National Gallery in London in 1987. In 2002, he became the director of the British Museum, where he remained until 2015. So for 13 years, he ran British Museum. So you can think what level of experience he has. During that time, he wrote and presented several influential books and series for BBC Radio 4, including the seminal work, A History of the World in 100 Objects, and Shakespeare's Restless World, and Germany, Memories of a Nation, which was published 100 years after the outbreak of World War I, and aimed to recover narratives of that country that went beyond the two wars. During this period, he was also on the board of National Theatre London. His continuing preoccupation has been to make available to the widest public objects and stories that make sense of the world, take us into the minds of others, and reveal the ways in which our apparently discrete histories interconnect. From 2015 to 2018, he was founding director of Humboldt Forum Berlin. At the end of 2021, he held the Chair du Louvre at the Musée du Louvre in Paris, giving a series of public lectures about museums and their constantly. In fact, today's topic is very apt for us and India. We also believe in gods. Most of us, we believe in God. We live with God. Many of our homes have puja ghar or praying place as a part of, a tradition. So even modern architecture, you will find people, even today will ask a separate room or separate place where they can do the puja, the worship to the God, and we have many, many, many thousands of gods. We don't have one or two, we have many, and in fact there are many festivals related to all these gods. And now recently you may be seeing and you may be reading about the revival of gods in India. Lot many new things, important things are happening. I will not stand between you and the audience. I am very grateful that you made it to Bihar Museum. Again, thanks to Sabyasachi also. He has been our well-wisher, he has been our advisor, and he has been helping us in making a good modern museum. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for introducing Neil. That was a very long CV. I'm sure I would personally lead 2 lives to achieve. I would like to introduce you for a bit before. Moving forward to our much anticipated talk, which has drawn viewers joining us through YouTube and Facebook. I am honored to welcome Mr. Neil MacGregor to speak about his work, Living with the Gods, Art, Belief in People. This remarkable work has been transformed into both a book and an exhibition. It examines narratives and stories that humans have shared over the past 4,000 years, contextualizing them through works of art and scriptures. Now the stage is all yours. You can please.
Thank you very much indeed, Director General, for that most generous welcome and for the invitation to what must, without question, be the most beautiful museum built in India in the last 100 years. It's my second visit now to the museum here in Patna, and this time I was even more admiring of the design, the display, the lighting, the narrative, the possibility to walk through time in the presence of great things which you've made possible here. And it's a very, very great honor to be here again. I was invited to talk about the exhibition recently held in Houston, Living with the Gods. But I want to start with really where the idea began. And the idea began in the most beautiful museum in India, built more than 100 years ago, which is is this going to work? Does it move forward? No. It's not. Okay. Thank you. Oh, no, I want one by one, not the whole lot. So we'll start there. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, and yes, it's this. I see. Thank you very much. Thank you. So I want to start in the museum in Mumbai, the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya, where we put on an exhibition last year, which was very much about what gods mean and what images of gods mean. The starting point for the whole idea has been that if we want to understand each other, we need to understand how we think about the divine. As the Director General has just said, the rest of the world can only look with admiration and envy to India for having so many gods and so many ways of engaging with the divine in every aspect of life. But every society has, of course, its gods, and how it thinks about its gods and how it presents them tells us a great deal about who they are and therefore who we are. And last year at the museum in Mumbai, the CSMVS, we put on an exhibition led by Dr. Mukherjee to look at the gods of the ancient Mediterranean, of Egypt, Greece, and Rome, and comparing those with the images of the gods from India. The idea was to present some very great works of art to an Indian public that haven't seen them, but also to help us all think differently about our own tradition. You know, of course, the tradition in your country. This is one of the view from the rotunda of the CSMVS, the Indian Sculpture Gallery with images from the three of the great Indian religious traditions, the Buddhist, the Hindu, and the Jain. And all of them, of course, representing the body, but all of them representing the body and the human body in a way that to a European or to someone who is not brought up in these traditions is surprising. And that's what we wanted to look at, that the connection between the human and the divine as it's expressed through sculpture across the centuries. So opposite this collection of Indian sculpture, we brought from the British Museum and from Berlin great examples of Greek and Roman sculpture, this Dionysus, Bacchus, the god of wine, a totally different idea of the body of the god and of the god as a human getting drunk with the grapes. Or from Berlin, the Venus, Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Again, a very beautiful image, a very different notion of what a human can be in terms of a god, how a god can be seen as a human. And the idea was to show these gods from Egypt, Greece, and Rome in the context of Indian collections, but with India in the middle. And in the center, Dr. Mukherjee proposed and found this wonderful image of a totally Indian conception of the divine, unthinkable to the Greek or the Roman tradition, the Varaha, the Adi Varaha, showing the god Vishnu as Varaha rescuing the world. It's that putting together of two different traditions that we wanted to focus on. And the sheer surprise to any European that we can be talking about the same thing. When you think about the divine, the God, how the gods connect to us, the range of ways of doing that in India is far greater than in the Mediterranean, the European tradition. The very striking fact that in the Roman tradition, the Greek tradition, the gods are simply like human beings, and human beings doing nothing. Ordinary human beings, just very beautiful ones. And we wanted to let the visitor compare and look at the other cultures, but with India in the center. And the point was to change the narrative of the way we think about the histories of the different cultures. And that's what we've been trying to do in all these exhibitions, to use the objects not just to tell a story of the past, which we all know, but actually to use the object to unsettle the story, to change the story, and above all, to make all of us think differently about the story and about our own histories. Because when we see them with other histories, we see them differently. And it's when we compare our tradition with another tradition that we understand our own better. And the purpose was to allow a new generation of students of all ages to look at these gods from a different world, a different way of thinking about the divine, and that they would then be able to think more deeply, to appreciate more fully their tradition of the divine and how we show it. That was the purpose of the exhibition in Mumbai, and it was seen by the director of the museum in Houston, in Texas, who thought this idea of looking at gods from different cultures together was a very striking and interesting and difficult thing to do, because it forces us to ask the big questions. And so, with him, we put on a bigger exhibition covering a much wider field of images, sculptures, paintings that represent the divine. We all know the divine is intangible. The divine is beyond us. It's everywhere. It's around us. But we want to give it a shape. And how we give it shape is the question. And he wanted it to be the centenary of the museum, the centenary exhibition for the museum in Houston, the Museum of Fine Arts. Opened in 1924, and as you can see, it's the Museum of Fine Arts erected by the people for the use of the people. And that was very much his thinking, Gary Tinterer, the director, that the museum is for the use of the people. It is for the people to use and for the people to enjoy, but it has a purpose, a civic purpose. It's the most beautiful building, as you can see, almost a Greek temple of the arts. But the one thing that would let you know that you were definitely in Texas is that at the door you have the sign to remind you that this is Texas and we are in the United States. But his purpose was a very particular one. Houston in Texas is a very, very large city. It's one of the most ethnically and religiously mixed cities in the whole of the United States, along with New York and Los Angeles. Because of the oil in Texas, huge numbers of specialists have come over generations from across the Middle East and around the world. Because of NASA, the space exploration, huge numbers of experts have come from India, from China, and from elsewhere in the world. And because it's a great center for medical research, again, scholars and experts from all around the world. What he wanted to look at was when our neighbors come to live with us, our new neighbors, they bring with them their gods. People travel with their gods. And if we're going to understand our neighbors, we need to understand their gods. And we need to understand how they think about their gods. And that was his purpose, to show what is the same and what is different in the different ways we all share the desire to engage with the divine and with the gods and to live with each other. That was his first purpose. His second purpose was that this is a museum of fine arts, of beautiful things. But what he wanted to demonstrate was that as well as things being beautiful, many of them were made with a specific spiritual purpose that we have lost sight of. And this is something I think is a problem really only in Europe and in America, not in India. it's perfectly clear in an Indian museum, looking at Indian sculpture of the past, that most of this was made with a religious purpose. You can't forget that. But in Europe and America, the secular world has become so strong that the objects are looked at simply as works of art. What Gary Tintoret wanted to do was to recover the original dimension that made the work of art as something spiritual. And this is a very good example. It's a 13th century dove, as you can see. A magnificent piece of metalwork, beautifully made, but it's not simply somebody making a bird. In the Christian tradition, the dove is the symbol of the Spirit of God. The dove coming from heaven to be among us is the God dwelling among us. This was made to hang. You can see there's a little hook on its back to hang in the church over the altar to represent that in the church the divine is present. What he wanted to do was to recover that dimension to the objects in his collection and to make them not just works of art, but works of art that take us to contact with another world of the divine. So what for you is straightforward, you know immediately what is going on here. For a European and American audience, even works like this become hard to read other than as works of art. They need explanation, they need time, and they benefit by comparison. And while these are obviously religious, but both with the same purpose of water that you have to. And in the fire in Houston, because as well as having a jali emblem of the fire, it's constant attention. It's constant attention. And it's, not surprisingly, an emblem that in all fire, it's how you come close to the presence of God. But it's all traditions of Pakistan. After 1947, the population, they brought this Parsis to God. This wonderful painting by MacGregor hand descends on the following. And how can you show that? How can you show somebody is the Spirit of God? Only that they have flames on them, but not consuming them. That they themselves begin to take the shape of flames. The flame image, the fire image, goes from Zoroastrianism to Christianity with no problem at all. And it goes on and on, being picked up. One of the most famous moments in the Christian story is the moment when the angel of God, the messenger of God on the left with the wings, comes to tell Mary that she is going to be the mother of Jesus, the mother of the child of God. She's going to have God's child. It's an image that every Christian knows well, and everybody's familiar with the idea of the angel with wings coming as the messenger. If you are a black American artist at the late 19th century, and if you go to train in Paris, and you then travel to Egypt and to Jerusalem, and spend a lot of time in the Islamic world, but you are a Christian and you want to paint this subject, how do you paint the presence of God coming to you? You can't think of it as a white person with wings. It's ridiculous. But how do you do it? How do you suggest that this young woman, suddenly the presence of God is in her room? How can you show it? And that artist, Henry Tanner, who has been looking a lot at Islamic art, looking at the mosque lamps with the flame of God in the mosque lamp, he decides that an angel is ridiculous. What actually, the only way you can show the idea of the presence of God is this great shaft of light, the energy of light, the mystery of light. And this astonishing idea, here is Mary this time looking exactly as you would expect, like a frightened young woman from the Middle East. And God is present in this remarkable, totally new, in Christian art tradition, as a shaft of light. What was wonderful about this exhibition was that we could show this, which is a very striking painting in the Christian tradition, and most of the visitors would be Christians, but we can show it, and in the next room show another tradition where God, as a shaft of light, is of course absolutely normal, the Shiva. Because very strikingly, the idea of the Shiva Linga is, and Shiva as the shaft of light, is doing almost exactly the same thing. That God is present as the shaft of light, and from that will come a new life. They're both generative light, the divine generating new life. It was this kind of putting together that we wanted quite deliberately to do. It's very difficult and it's dangerous, because for all people these traditions are very sacred and very valuable, and to talk about them or to compare them can be unsettling. But it seemed to us very important because it shows things that are common, but which on the surface may be very far apart. And that this is a part of the understanding that the director of the museum wanted to foster among the different religions in Houston. It also let us try to do something else, because all the great religious imagery traditions, which are about how people live with their idea of the God, like this 12th century image on the left of Shiva, in the column, as the column that that goes below the bottom of the earth. You can't go below the earth, and you can't go above it in the sky. This is what inspired Anish Kapoor with the work on the right. And we wanted to show that these iconographies, these visual forms from the past, can be taken into abstraction and speak very powerfully, either to people who come from that faith tradition and can see it as a Shiva Lingam, or people from outside who have all the mystery of how that column sits inside the void, what happens behind it, what is the relationship between the column and the void. That these traditions go on and develop even in the world of abstract art. Both the Shiva Lingam and the angel appearing to Mary lead to new life. And one of the key points we wanted to make in the exhibition was the point we had first explored in the CSMVS last year. What is the body of a god? If the god is visible on earth as a living thing, what body does it have? And we just wanted to contrast absolutely straightforwardly the huge difference between the Mediterranean Greek-Roman tradition and the Indian. And what was very interesting with our visitors and hearing them talk about it was the extent to which they began to realize how strangely limited the Western tradition is. In the Western tradition, if God is given form in Greece or Rome, it is only as a human body, never as an animal, and never vegetable. The divine is limited and narrowed to the human. That's a very remarkable thing when one thinks of it, and a thing which is, and a human body which is a very beautiful one, but one human body and of one gender. So this gallery, you can see, we wanted to show, we've focused rather on Shiva because we wanted to show that the same God will have many different ways of being represented in a way that is not the case with Greece or Rome. So putting together things in this gallery, you can see in the center, the Sadashiva, with many different heads, and showing that to a Western eye, that the divine must be more than a simple human. That it's impossible to think you could imagine the divine just as a human body. But that is, of course, the whole of the Western tradition. And the juxtapositions, here we are, and the juxtapositions were very striking. This magnificent Roman god shows you perfectly that it is the perfect body. The perfect human body becomes the god, the Roman warrior god on the left. And to Westernized, astounding idea of the Ardhanarishvara Shiva, male and female at the same time. The idea that a god must be more than just one person, cannot just be one gender. This was, I think, the gallery that caused the greatest discussions and the greatest, if you like, unease among our Christian visitors. They were fascinated by this idea that our imagining of the God was so narrow compared, then there was another way of addressing this, and that you could think of the divine in a different form. And this is one example. The other example, obviously, the fact that the animal must also be part of an imagining of the divine. We saw the Varaha earlier on, but this wonderful dancing Shiva from the Asia Society in New York beside a slightly dancing Venus. It's these comparisons, I think, showed up very much that to live with the gods in a Greco-Roman Christian tradition is actually to have a much narrower notion of the divine than in many other cultures. But staying with the body, we wanted constantly to make these comparisons, do pairings. And there are two traditions where the faithful are asked to meditate on a body, a human body, a male human body, an ordinary male human body. And that is the focus of contemplation. So not a body like the Ganesh or like the Shivas we've seen, but the body of Jesus Christ and the body of the Buddha. They're unique, I think, in having a focus on the body to be contemplated on. So we had a joint gallery at the heart, one with the life of Christ and one with the life of the Buddha, showing the different stages of the life of Christ. In particular, of course, as you can see, the crucifixion here, and then the resurrection here when Christ rises from the dead. And then on the and again, to give you a sense of scale, that crucifixion is over life size, and was quite a problem to get onto the wall. And then on the other side, the life of Buddha and different images of Buddha. And here we were extremely lucky with our loans from various American museums. This wonderful Mathura image of the Buddha is among the oldest images of the Buddha that we have. A marvelous, marvelous piece to have. And these statues faced the statues of Jesus. So the viewer could look at the two bodies and ask really a very important question about what is going on. This Japanese Buddha, the Buddha of infinite illumination, around 1100, and then the Bernini bronze of the Christ on the cross of about 1650. And in both traditions, it's important to look at them. But we wanted to make the point that what the sculpture is doing, what it's asking you, the spectator, to do, is something very different. In the tradition of contemplating the body of the Buddha, you are meant to replicate the posture and replicate the experience, if you can, of the Buddha. You are meant to sit hoping for enlightenment, contemplating still as he is. You imitate his actions and you hope to achieve something of the same result. And the whole making of the work of art is made with that purpose, to fix you, to hold you, to slow you down, to still you. Quite different is the idea of the imitation, looking at the Christ. You are not meant for a second to copy this. You are not meant at all to think that you should do this. You are meant to contemplate him doing something, suffering, from which you will benefit and which is caused by your bad behavior. In each case, the hope is that you will reach compassion. Compassion by following the path of the Buddha on one side, compassion by recognizing that your bad behavior leads to suffering, other people's suffering on the other. The two great traditions that have developed the male human body as a subject, totally different purposes and very powerful, set opposite one another. And to develop the point, we just wanted to show that the brief moment in the Buddha's history when the Buddha, as the ascetic, chooses to suffer, and there's this wonderful Japanese image of the Buddha, and then abandons it, as you all know better than I, and then attains enlightenment when the body stops suffering, because the body must be able to support contemplation, whereas the Christian tradition stays constantly with the focus on the suffering. Two very, very different ways of thinking about how you manage and hold your connection with the divine through a work of art. And here again, we wanted to try that question of can the form without the subject still work as something that moves you. And I think for any Christian viewer, any European viewer, the image of the crucifixion is so strong, so present, that even an image like the image on the left, which is simply made of cloth in resin, hung like that, is read as somehow an exploration of suffering and possibly of redemption. That's how it was painted, how it was made by the artist Mallory. And like the Anish Kapoor and the Shivalingam, the traditional form goes on into the abstract form with comparable but slightly different meanings. I think you can see what we've been trying to do, to compare traditions, to surprise, to unsettle, but also to lead, we hope, to a greater understanding of how another group of people, our neighbors, think about the same kinds of questions. And coming out of this set of rooms with the bodies of the gods, the body of the Buddha, the body of Christ, it comes as quite a shock when you come to a room with the three great traditions where you have no images at all. And the sheer revolutionary, extraordinary decisions of Judaism, the Jewish tradition, to forbid any image at all, and taken up, of course, by Islam and by certain Christian traditions. And walking into this room, you really feel astonished. And you realize that this is, if you're going to live with your gods in this way, you have to do something very, very different. You have to think very hard about how you live with the word, because you can't live with the image. And everything we've done till now has been about living with the image. And, of course, one of the traditions, one of what you do, particularly in the Islamic tradition, is you make the word wonderfully beautiful. And you turn it into something that is an aesthetic experience. And we wanted to compare these three traditions. On the right hand at the bottom, the Jewish one here, the one right at the bottom right here, which hangs on the scroll in the synagogue. And as you can see, it's a shield of gold which puts in honor the reading for the day, the text for the day. The scrolls in the synagogue, which are read regularly, this is how you honor the word and live with the word. And to the left of that, in a Christian church, the Protestant churches, which don't have images, on the altar, you don't have an image, you have the word of God. And then above, this wonderful Indian version of the throne verse, huge inscription, beautiful calligraphy, explaining that God is everywhere. But the writing has become a source of beauty. And how you live with that, you take this out. This is outside. You take it out into the world, you put it outside the buildings so that you can see it, and you can live with it in any way you like, in every medium. So we had Islamic texts on ceramics, on textiles, on wood, and this wonderful little emerald with the same text as that long one at the top, inscribed on the emerald. You can carry it with you. To the right, how the Jews honor the word in the synagogue. The word never leaves the synagogue in that sense. And then the Protestant tradition, that you sing the word, and you sing it everywhere. And that's how you live with it. The hymns, the songs, and which became, as you can see from here, I hope, particularly important. These are called the slave songs of the United States. It was these songs, religious songs, that became the way the slaves could live with their God in public, and of course became the basis of the movement for freedom of the slaves, and Martin Luther King singing the songs, or living with the word, living with God through the word. But we wanted to finish on something that everybody does. And while we'd looked at different traditions doing the same thing in different ways, the one thing every tradition does is they find God in eating together. The feast. God in the feast is absolutely universal. It seems that every society believes that sharing food is when God is with you, and is in the sharing and in the eating. It's why every wedding, every funeral, every birthday, every great celebration has to be about eating food with other people. And we gathered together images and objects from to do with showing this. In the Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition, right at the beginning, the image on the left, Abraham, who's standing here. This is Abraham, the Jewish patriarch. 3 strangers turn up, and Abraham invites them to dinner. And as he starts serving them with his wife Sarah, they turn into angels, because hospitality to the stranger is hospitality to God. And they tell him that his old wife Sarah is going to have a son. Entertaining the stranger is entertaining God. The Last Supper with Jesus, with his disciples, which becomes the communion in the Christian tradition. On the right-hand side, the iftar in the Islamic tradition, in Ramadan, and when you, after fasting in the day, eating in the evening, and you're sharing the iftar with everybody round about. The iftar as a shared meal, as part of the exercise of Ramadan. It's a wonderful photograph from Central Asia. And then the Sikh langar. That extraordinary, generous tradition, I think unparalleled in any other religious tradition, of providing food for everybody on equal terms. And in Western Europe, particularly during the COVID epidemic, the Sikh provided enormous amounts of food for the homeless as part of their tradition, and have become an essential part of that. And it's in sharing the food that we find the gods, we live with the gods, and we live with each other. And that's where we come back to the spoon. Because this spoon, it's about that high. It's from West Africa, the Dan people, and they believe that it is, of course, the sharing of the food that holds the community together. The community will survive only if it eats together. And each year, they decide which mother in the community has done most to provide food, hold the family, hold the community together. Because it's the woman making food that holds the whole of society together. And this large ladle is given to her. She then goes through the village scattering rice to everybody, and is part of a great ceremony for sowing new food, new harvests, new sharing, the divine in the form of a spoon, in the form of a mother cooking, holding the society. We live with our gods, we live with each other. And all these traditions, of course, are about doing things together. What we wanted to emphasize is that none of these traditions that we've been looking at are about the solitary person retreating alone. To live with the gods is to live in society with each other. How you do it is the question. But we finished with the two largest religious gatherings in the world, although it must be said, of course, that the Kumbh Mela is in a different league from the Hajj, but it pulls it together. And finishing with the idea that everybody has so many points of communality. The Ram statue, which we had in the exhibition, was there at the time of Diwali. And the lights of Diwali, the lights of Hanukkah for the menorah in the Jewish tradition, the idea of Jesus as the light of the world. These ideas go across every faith. We share all these things, and that's what we need to think about when we're living with neighbors. And certainly in every European city now, I mean in London, There are now over 300 separate languages spoken. There are 40 or 50 different organized religions. We can't live well with our neighbors unless we know how they live with their gods and how we want to live with them. So that's what we were trying to do. And it seems to me it's also a question about what a museum is for. This is not just presenting the work of art, it's not presenting a story of art. And normally all these objects would be shown in completely different departments. But one of the purposes of the museum is to remind every citizen that what they share is the museum. And what they share is access to these objects and to think about them in conversation with each other. And it takes me back to where I began in the CSMVS in Mumbai. Because what you can do, I think, in exhibitions by putting things together like this is you can change the narratives, you can change the way people think, you can take a single narrative and show it's part of something much bigger. And that's what we're hoping to do in the next phase of the exhibition in Mumbai. A 3-year exhibition to look at the ancient world as seen from India. Normally the stories of the ancient world begin in the Mediterranean or in Mesopotamia. But India has its own ancient world set between the ancient worlds of China on one side and Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean on the other. If you start with India, the way we started in the center with the Varaha, and then look out, you have a different story of the rest of the world, but also a different story of India. The time scale will be effectively from Harappa to Nalanda. Harappa, one of the great river civilizations, along with China, Mesopotamia, and Egypt. And Nalanda, the moment at which the whole world is coming to Nalanda to learn, to study, and to take knowledge back. And to parallel that with Alexandria, the great library there, where the world is coming to Alexandria to learn, to study, and then to travel. These two great poles, Alexandria and Nalanda, around the end of the ancient world. And that's what we're hoping to do, start at the end of this year. We are being guided by Mr. Mukherjee with his usual iron hand, and we've got some wonderful loans arranged again from London, Berlin, from Kuwait, and from Switzerland. And we're hoping, I think, also, I have to warn you, to come to you to ask for some loans as well, because we wanted to finish with Nalanda. It seems to us the moment at which so many of the traditions in India come together, and where the whole world is coming to Patna, in fact, from Greece and from China, to look at what is happening here, and to think differently about the world, which means, as always, thinking differently about your gods, your position with them, how you live with them, and how you live with your neighbors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil, for this very nuanced analysis of art, society, and religion, and the juxtaposition between the three. I believe that we are all taking home a fresh perspective on the narratives that shape the social and religious fabric of self and society. Now I would like to request Sabyasachi sir, if you could please come and share your thoughts on the session and the exhibition with us.
Good evening. Thank you, Anjani Babu, for giving us the opportunity. Neil had a desire to share this exhibition with all of you. I was very fortunate to participate in our international project, Ancient World Gallery. It's a very complicated project. We have been working 4.5 years on one project and got the opportunity to interact with many world leaders, and one of them just right in front of you, and debated on many subjects. And particularly, one of the most complicated subjects we wanted to address. Usually, museums all over the world, they try to avoid when it comes to divine. That's the most, complicated area. But that is something we wanted to understand, we wanted to imagine. The last exhibition, we did the ancient sculpture in conversation with Greece, Rome, Egypt, Assyria, and India. The whole idea was to explore India's connection, ancient India's connection with the rest of the world. And what we understood, besides what he said today, we see divine in everything. Yes, that is true. In India, we see divine in everything, in everywhere. But why do we see divine in everything? It is because of our belief. And belief leads us to imagine. And imagination gives it a form. And that the form comes before us in different ways. And that is something we realized the last exhibition, the way Indian imagined their divine and the way Greece, the people of Greece imagine their divine. The people of Egypt imagine their divine. The people of Assyria imagine their divine. And what we realized, everywhere, in human form. And some imagination, little abstract, where you get to see half human, half animal. And then the question was, how it all started. In Indian context, we realized it was all intangible. There was no image initially. And image and icon developed much later in the context of Hinduism, in the context of Buddhism, in the context of Jainism. And particularly these three religions based on philosophies. Philosophy came first, icon came later. So the three images you shared with the audience, Buddha, Sadashiva, and Shantinath, the Jain, they actually represent three philosophies. Similarly, in other cultures, other religions, we also see the philosophy plays very important role. So what was interesting for us, and he gave it a new shape in Houston exhibition, connection, similarities, and differences in different cultures. And that is something we observed while working on Ancient World Gallery project. The phase 1 we could deliver, and the phase 2 he shared with you. It's a big one. Will be occupying almost 10,000 square feet space, bringing many other aspects besides divine, the life in ancient world, civilization, adan-pradan, exchange of knowledge. And while doing that research, Anjani Babu, you will be happy to know the committee, content committee, they felt that we conclude with a statement, and the statement is knowledge, and that was Nalanda. So we are going to end that entire project with Nalanda, that was the center of knowledge. Similarly, we find a kind of, activity in Alexandria, the ancient library of 30,000 books that was kept there with the same intention. And this kind of project going to organize many activities, many programs in collaboration with the Bihar Museum, at Bihar Museum, with your help and support. Thank you. Before I end, I think I need to invite few questions. If you have some questions, you can ask directly to Mr. MacGregor. Without any hesitation, you can ask.
Sir,
Yeah.
in your opinion, what is the better place of an ancient statue? The museum or the temple? Is this all?
Thank you very much. That's a very, very difficult question, and it's a very important one. For the ancient statues from Greece and Rome and Egypt, of course, they are no longer worshipped. So the temple doesn't have the same meaning in that sense. It's a very big question in terms of such as paintings taken out of Christian churches. I think I think now, given what has happened in Western, that religion is playing a smaller and smaller part. Is that? I think there is now more chance of people seeing them and using them in the museums than in the churches. But for the temples, for the temples where the religions are still a very, very complicated question. I'm not sure there need be, I don't know how much you would agree with this. I think it's perfectly possible in a museum for an object both to be an object of veneration to those who want to venerate it, and to be an object for study and enjoyment by those who want to look at it as a historic or aesthetic object. One of the things I found most interesting at the British Museum was that in the Indian sculpture gallery there, we quite often found offerings in front of the statues. And I thought to tell a history and to raise, and as part of it, the aesthetic development of Indian art, they still could be used by the public who wanted to use them as the image of the divine that they wanted to honor. So I hope the answer is that more and more can be both. But it's a very difficult question, and a lot will depend on the circumstances of the removal. And
Ancient statue till today, and people are trying to occupy this statue for their temple and want to worship with water and color and other things. And museum are trying to put these statues in museum.
I think everything hinges on the circumstances of the finding and the acquisition.
I was just wondering that you mentioned Alexandria as one of the points for your forthcoming. Not choose something like Timbuktu, where the libraries in Timbuktu Alexandria might have offered?
It's a very good question. The question, in case you couldn't hear it, was why had we just focused on Alexandria and the library there, and not the library in Timbuktu, which is a very, very important library and which has great difficulties at the moment and needs international attention and help. The first reason was the date chronologies that we've set ourselves. Because our exhibition ends around 500 of Timbuktu. The second reason is that, as Mr. Mukherjee has said, what we're trying to show is that throughout the ancient world, from Harappa on, India was in regular contact with the Eastern Mediterranean, as with East Asia, China, and Southeast Asia. So Alexandria and Egypt are part of the story all the way through. But it's a very, very good point. And I think we must make a note to mention that there are, of course, libraries in Western Africa. But as far as I know, there's very little direct contact with the Indian world at that stage, at 500.
And how they live with God in Africa and Latin America?
So in the exhibition in Houston, we had quite a lot of Latin American material. So from ancient whatever were present. And we also had, very importantly, gods and representations of gods from the contemporary African American, from Haiti, and those traditions, because they're very much alive, and they're a very important part for the population in Houston. I could only show you, of course, a certain how the Central and Latin American traditions, after Christianity, survived and took new forms, was something we wanted to explore. There was very little from Africa. There were 3 or 4 pieces from Africa, but they were mostly African American rather than African. But when we did the radio series and the book, which was based on the British Museum, there was a great deal on African material. Again, partly because there's a large African population in London, so we wanted to address that.
Observation was that, is it because of the time that you were not able to include these tribal deities or the folk deities?
Yes, exactly. Yes, it was partly that, and it was because I was, and there we weren't able to include, for a very interesting reason. I was very eager when I was invited to do the exhibition in Houston. I thought this would be a marvelous opportunity to include the Native American, trying to show the objects and put them as part of the story, because they've so often not been part of the story. As you know, the difficulty is always that it's the cultures that write and the cultures that make things in stone and metal that get into the museums for obvious reasons. This seemed to me a great opportunity. What was very surprising to me and disappointing was that the representatives of the North American Indian, as they call themselves, in the North American indigenous Indian whatever communities, didn't want their religious material to be seen or to be shown in the context of other things. And that obviously we had to respect. So very disappointingly, there were American art to do with their beliefs, and virtually nothing from the living traditions of those beliefs, because the communities or their representatives didn't want to give their consent to them being shown in the museum other than in a religious context with their people. And this, I think, is a really very interesting problem because it makes it... I've been involved in similar difficult conversations in Australia where Aboriginal communities don't want their material, particularly their sacred material, to be shown in the museums because they feel they are the guardians of that and it ought not to be seen by people outside the community or only in certain circumstances. We have to respect that. One of the consequences is that it's very hard for us to understand those beliefs and to know how we ought, therefore, to behave or think politically to take account of them. And of course, it's because of the brutal political history of expropriation and destruction of the communities, both in Australia and in North America. We can all understand why that's happened, but it makes that question a very, very difficult one. So thank you for asking it. I don't know whether there's the same phenomenon and difficulty in India, whether tribal communities have the same, some of them, are nervous about their material being shown.
Luckily, the tribal gods in India are trees, stones, mountains. So they never, that is nature. Their god is nature.
Be put into the museum. Yes,
Yeah, you
exactly.
can put a tree, you can put, no problem.
There are very good pieces from the tribal cultures, indigenous cultures in Indian museums, like Craft Museum, National Craft Museum of New Delhi. In India, they were really different between what we call as classical or the folk traditions.
Yes.
Whether it is a music or sculptures or art, they both are equally important and equally represented in the minds of
Yes. Yes.
So I think its situation is quite much better, maybe because of the whether when Sabyasachi sir talked about the philosophical reasons. I think
Yes.
that problem is not there.
Thank you.
Ancient World Gallery project, we have incorporated tribal art, tribal gods and goddesses in our gallery. So today, when you visit, you will see a cluster talking about tree divinity, the nature, what Anjani Babu talked about. So how nature was worshipped in different religions, so automatically, tribal community comes in. But what Neil said, do remember in Mumbai, we wanted to do something with Bodhi, and there was a resistance. So they felt that, museums should not share their religious, belief. And belief is something, I think you have a question, sir. Yeah.
First, it's a very delightful talk by you, and it has really encouraged us to think anew about many things. And you said that the chronological limits would be from Harappa to Nalanda.
Yes.
So I was wondering what kind of artifacts are going to be the focus of your exhibition, because apart from the sculptures, whole lot of artifacts, excavated materials, maybe potsherds, and many such things probably will be part of your exhibition. So I really want to hear that also. Secondly, you say that the terminus would be 5th century CE, and you are taking Nalanda. So Nalanda as an institution had barely begun in the 5th century,
Yes.
The foundation is attributed to, Kumar Gupta's time. And the sculptures, so what kind of artifacts from Nalanda would you like to put in that exhibition?
Thank you. The artifacts are going to be drawn from. They're very much about the various sections of the exhibition, as you would expect. What we thought was that there's a chance to show the Harappan, the world of the Indus, along with the Nile and Mesopotamia and China. the four civilizations, and to look at how each of them have some objects in common in terms of agriculture, how they live. So it's daily life objects, mostly, of course, coming from tombs in those three other cultures. We're going to have a large section on writing and the advance of writing in all the different places, apparently simultaneously, the problem of Harappan script, of course, and then quite a lot about power in the empires, looking at how the Mauryan Empire, the Chinese Empire, Greece, Persia, of course, and Greece. That, and then daily life. How childbirth? Every society needs to have object systems, talismans, gods for childbirth, for the mother, and so on. So it's that kind of approach, and throughout it, trade, because we want to show that all these ideas and objects are moving backwards and forwards. And the objects will be very varied, some great works of art, some domestic objects. But the purpose is elsewhere. The date we had to end somewhere. I know that Mr. Mukherjee is planning a sequel exhibition very much on India's links with East and Southeast Asia afterwards. And we wanted to stop, we had significance of India, centrality of India crystallizes. There won't be many objects. But we felt that we had to stop somewhere, and that's quite a convenient moment, because it's more or less the end of the Western Roman Empire and a different world in the Eastern Mediterranean, and that's what we've chosen. But I'm going to be very dishonest and unfair and say that the person who really should answer your question about the object is Mr. Mukherjee.
No, see, the whole idea why we conclude with Nalanda, we had a debate, we had a discussion. You will also agree, for many reasons, we could not highlight the contribution of Nalanda in the country and outside the country. I remember very clearly 10 years ago or 15 years ago, very few people used to talk about Nalanda the way we are talking today. So this is an opportunity, this project Ancient World Gallery. Trade is going to play a very important role, Southeast Asia. And then we thought, that exhibition doesn't end, that Nalanda, though Nalanda is an ending point, but the way the presentation, the exhibition will be designed and presented, it gives you a kind of indication that exhibition continues. And our next exhibition, through Nalanda, we are going to make a statement that our next exhibition is going to be India and Southeast Asia.
That is very apt. I was just wondering if you could really extend the chronological limit to say 7th or 8th century.
Yeah, it comes up to 6th.
So that would be taking the major chunk of the creativity of Nalanda, because Nalanda was most creative maybe till 8th century. I mean, you will take that phase.
Yeah, we are going to highlight that, through digital, largely digital technology we are going to use. And we hope Anjani Babu will be kind enough to share a couple of objects from his collection, Nalanda collection. So those objects and the technology will be the high points. And what you said very rightly, we are going to share all that information, but in a way that exhibition continues, and a statement the next exhibition is going to be India and Southeast Asia.
But can I just say thank you? I'm very glad that you're encouraging us to relax, to cheat a little on the time scale. We had to give a kind of date, but I think it would be well worth just trespassing beyond to make the point. So thank you. I shall use that. I shall use you, if I may, in arguments with my more rigorous academic colleagues. Saying that I think we should go further. Thank you.
Linearity does not work in India.
Exactly.
Acha, you have a question? The last question? Acha, please. Okay.
Go ahead, sir, please.
That's precisely why we're sort of ending there, because the objects mostly come later. Exactly. There's a question about the object. So could you repeat your question for everybody?
Yeah, so my only question is that when we are talking of the 5th century or 6th century with the Southeast Asia connection, we only have the references of the Kondini, nothing else we have from Southeast Asia. So visually we will not be able to show anything till 7th century,
I think this is another argument for pushing the date limit a bit. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it is going to be up to 6th, 7th century. Largely digital content. We are going to borrow a couple of objects, of course, representation of Southeast Asia from Indian Museum, Kolkata. We intend to. We hope we'll be able to manage, but digitally, yes. That is the whole idea. Yeah, you have an observation. Come here. Come here.
Basically, it has nothing to do with the timeline or the artifact. It's just an observation on your sessions. You talked about, no, thank you, please. I get really angry. You talked about how an artwork is produced to serve a purpose, and it's very important to look at the purpose to understand, and then you went on to look at that purpose in different geographical locations and different religions. It is also very interesting for me to then look at one context and look at that through different periods of time. For example, I was from the 14th century during the Renaissance time. It has a very different representation of Jesus than if I take maybe Rembrandt's portrayal of Lazarus, where it's more realistic than putting Jesus at the center. So that is what I thought while listening to your lecture. That's while we're looking at one thing through different religions and geographical locations, looking at one thing through different periods of time, and the purpose that they serve is also a very interesting thing to look at through paintings or through sculptures or in general.
You're absolutely right, and it shows really the key question is the key thing is that we need permanent displays so that people can find their way around and come to know a collection. But every time you put an object, a work of art, with a different neighbor, both of them are changed. And we know that. You see them differently, they say different things, which is why you need to keep exhibitions, keep the objects moving, and in different conversations. Because it's the conversations between the objects that are, I think, almost more interesting than the objects on their own. Exactly. You're absolutely right.
See, ultimately, we will go, object will stay. And thank you so much. It was wonderful. Neil, on behalf of Bihar Museum, I thank you. On behalf of the team of Bihar Museum, I thank you. It was wonderful. It was an enriching experience. And I take this opportunity to thank the Bihar Museum curatorial team for organizing this lecture and taking the pain in organizing the PPT and other things. Thank you very much. They are all enthusiastic, and look forward to working together. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here today. Please join us in Pot Belly for tea and refreshments. Have a very good evening. Thank you.